So welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes and their challenges and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning, I'm delighted to have with us Andrew Hogley, who's the CEO at British Wool. So Andrew, firstly, thanks so much for spending some time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and British Wool to the audience, that would be great.
Thanks, Chris. So British Wool is the best way to think of us as a farmers cooperative. So we collect the wool from 35,000 sheep farmers around the length and breadth of the British Isles. We take in their wool, we sort it out, we then present it to sale so that it can be used by the wool industry. And as many of your listeners will know, Chris, Yorkshire is still the home of the wool industry. We've got some fantastic businesses around here, some great manufacturers, some great wool processors, some great spinners. And British Wool is based in Bradford to really be at the heart of that industry and to market the wool that's grown in the British Isles on behalf of our members, to get that wool to market and into some fantastic end products.
Wonderful, absolutely, and fascinating. It's as you say, described as a farmers cooperative in that way. And as a background, I actually grew up on a very small holding in North Wales, where I remember shearing the sheep and obviously getting it all ready to be taken away. So I'm fascinated for what we're going to talk about a bit further. So just as we start, Andrew, if you could tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into business and why this particular one.
So I grew up in Huddersfield, then went away to university and did a science degree, and then, as many people do, ended up working in the City of London. And I did 12 years living in London, working in London, then another 7 years living back up in Yorkshire and commuting down to London every week. And post-Brexit, it was time for a bit of a reassessment and time to get a real job actually doing something. So when I was working in the city, I was analysing telecoms companies, so the likes of Vodafone, France Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, meeting with their CEOs, CFOs, and producing reports for the major shareholders, so businesses like Scottish Widows, Aviva, Standard Life, and basically saying buy British Telecom, sell Vodafone, or vice versa, depending on the share price, to pension fund managers. So I'd spent a lot of time with company management, understanding businesses. I was a chartered financial analyst, and I was ready to make a change and actually come into a business, and rather than just criticizing from the outside, and actually get involved. And an opportunity arose at British Wool, as I was already living back in Yorkshire at that time, and I came in to do a business strategy role, and then just over 2 years ago had the opportunity to step up to lead the organisation. Admittedly, it was a very challenging time, right in the heart of the COVID crisis. Yes.
Goodness, that must have been an interesting time to come on board. So I mean, going back to your background things, when you were growing up, is this the sort of thing you foresaw yourself doing, or did you have other plans at that time?
I don't think I ever imagined myself as a child running British Wool. I think I wanted to be a train driver or a sheep farmer, or then as I went through my academic career, wanted to be a scientist until I saw what the life of a scientist was. And the bright lights of London. It's a fantastic place to live when you're in your 20s and you don't have young children and you don't have commitments. But there was a clear motivation to move back home, as was, and so I've been living in Home Firth now for nearly 15 years.
Wonderful. So obviously you said you joined obviously in the middle of COVID and lockdown, and there's obviously as well as that. But what since then? What are some of the biggest issues you've had to overcome as an organisation?
So the big issues are essentially we are handling a commodity product. So we're handling the raw material for the textiles trade. British Wool, whilst 35,000 sheep farmers sounds a lot, we handle about 25,000 tons of wool every year. And that's only 2% of the world's wool. and wool is only 1% of the global fibre market. So whilst we're a significant size organisation in UK and UK farming, and we're the major supplier to a lot of the UK industry, it's a global commodity market that we're selling into, which means we don't have pricing power. And in the COVID markets in particular, the type of wool and the products that British wool goes into, our end markets were hit. So our biggest end markets are products for the interior sector, particularly your hotels, your casinos, your cruise ships. A lot of the wool that is grown in the UK is used in the carpet industry, and it's carpets for businesses, carpets for the hospitality sector, carpets for your big hotels. And through the COVID pandemic, all of those end customers were shut down. And that really impacted the supply demand dynamic. And as a commodity supplier, the wool kept growing, but the demand fell back, and that meant that the prices that sheep farmers were getting, and I work on behalf of the sheep farmers, they've not been covering the cost of shearing for the last 3 years. The market was just starting to recover, and then, of course, we get hit by an energy crisis, which takes out consumer confidence, it takes out business confidence, but it's also had a really big impact on the wool processors. So whether that's the scouring plants who wash the wool, the dyeing companies, the spinning companies, they're all energy intensive businesses. And the cost of taking the greasy fleece from a sheep and transforming it into a jumper, transport fabric, a mattress, a carpet, the impact of the rising energy costs has been very challenging for our customers, and again, limits the return to sheep farmers. So in terms of the business, we've had to cut our cloth accordingly, pardon the pun. We've been through a restructuring. Very shortly after I stepped up to be CEO, we essentially had to make 20% of our workforce redundant. It's not a situation that any business leader ever wants to go through, but it was essential for the long-term viability of the business and in terms of ensuring the viability for our members. The other challenge we have is the number of sheep is not determined by the wool price. The number of sheep in the UK is determined by the market for lamb and the environmental subsidies. So, and as we've had the Brexit, we've moved from the Common Agricultural Policy, we're moving to a system called ELMS, Environmental Land Management. And that's what the new payment support system is. And for our sheep farmer members, the land price and the subsidy regime determine the economics of keeping sheep. And we're handling essentially the byproduct of the lamb production trade. So sheep have to be shorn for animal welfare, and it's crucial that sheep are shorn every year to keep them in good condition and keep them healthy. But the number of sheep that are being shorn depends on how profitable it is to be a sheep farmer and grow fantastic lamb for us to eat and enjoy. And a lot of lamb that's grown in the UK is exported to Europe. So there's been fears, were there going to be tariffs on lamb export? That created huge uncertainty for our farmer members until the Brexit deal was agreed. And at the same time, there's been the uncertainty about what's happening with the subsidy regime. And you have other pressures. So agricultural land is being taken out of food production and used for tree planting for carbon offsets. And again, that affects the sheep numbers. So British Wool as an organisation has to look at a lot of these external factors over which we've got no control and make sure we have our collection network in the right place. It's as cost effective as possible so that we can market what wool is grown and get it to commercial end users.
Wowzers. There's a lot of moving parts in that.
There are huge numbers. So to give you an example of some of the stakeholders that we have to engage with. So yesterday I was in Wales with the National Farming Union of Wales, for example. Their members are our members. Whilst we operate as a farmers cooperative, legally we're still a statutory body. We don't get any public sector funding, but we are answerable in our governance structure to DEFRA and the devolved assemblies. So I'm meeting with ministers, Welsh Assembly members, Scottish MSPs, and building the relationships, and the National Sheep Association. And then we've got the customer side of the business, the processing plants, and crucially, the end brands and the companies, whether it's Harrison Spinks as a mattress manufacturer, the wool room making, bedding, John Cotton, another good local company that are the users and the end customers. We've got to have the engagement with those and help support them grow their businesses, because those are the businesses that we want to be specifying British wool to use in their products.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned, and forgive me if I got this wrong before we started, was that not all wool-based products manufactured in the UK are using British wool. Did I get that right?
That's absolutely right, Chris. So there's about 25 million kilos of wool that we handle as an organisation. In total in the UK, there's about 30 million kilos of wool produced, but a lot of the Irish wool, the Norwegian wool, some New Zealand wool comes in, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we've got to keep the processing plants, and the only two processing plants that there are in Europe are both based in West Yorkshire. One's in Dewsbury, one's in Bradford. We need to have enough wool coming in to keep those plants economically viable. But just because a product is made of wool and is made of wool in the UK doesn't mean that wool came from UK sheep farmers. And one of the key challenges, it's a challenge and an opportunity, is to get the end brands to specify, I want my product to be made from British wool. I want it to be made from wool that has been grown in the UK. And can we give the end brand the support to make that decision, essentially? How are we going, if a mattress manufacturer can have wool that they can trace back to British farms, does that give them a marketing edge over a mattress manufacturer that's just using wool of a generic origin? And there's all sorts of good reasons that companies should be specifying British wool. Our animal welfare standards in the UK are some of the best in the world. That's something that UK sheep farmers should be proud of. And, if you're sourcing from UK farms, you can have confidence that the animal welfare standards are good. The environmental legislation and protection in the UK is some of the best in the world. The processing plants that we have in the UK have to adhere to really strict environmental standards. Now, Yorkshire Water monitor what comes out of those two plants very closely. But you can have an assurance that if you're using UK wool processed in the UK, that the environmental box gets a tick in, the animal welfare box gets a tick in. As a farmers cooperative, we're here as a socially responsible supplier, and the quality that we offer to end customers, every single fleece that we prepare to market, it's graded by hand. So we have 8 grading depots around the UK, one of which is in Bradford. And every single fleece that farmers send in is hand sorted. And before I joined British Wool, I'll be honest with you, Chris, I thought, wool was just fluffy white stuff and wool was wool. We produce over 100 different product lines of UK wool. And, some sheep are very different from others. A Herdwick sheep is very distinctive, and clearly the wool off a Herdwick sheep has a specific character. But a Cheviot sheep has wool of a different character, a Swaledale, a Romney, a mule. But if you're going to be able to produce a quality yarn, you need to have the assurance that the wool that's going into that yarn is of a consistent character. And that's what our grading system, and the really skilled staff in British Wool are our graders. Those are the guys that day in, day out are sorting the UK clip, and that's where we add the value.
Wow, fascinating. It's I say so many moving parts. I'm keen to know, Andrew, from a business perspective, what sort of are the key learnings you've had about running this business or business in general, and what were the key things that you've learned so far?
So absolutely, you've to watch your costs. You've to, yes, we're a not-for-profit, but essentially our bottom line is what we can return to our farmer members, and
yes,
we return the values. But so much, it's about the people, it's about the relationships, it's having the respect of your employees, but also the respect of your customers and your suppliers, and having that trust and building those relationships. And there'll always be tensions. As a supplier, you want to charge more. As a customer, you want to pay as little as possible. But it's having that discussion and building that trust with all of those key stakeholders.
Yeah, that's
important. And there'll always be points of tension. If there weren't points of tension, you're probably doing your job wrong. But it's how you manage that and work collaboratively with a supply chain. Now, to get the fleece from a sheep, you've got the farmer rearing the sheep, you've got a sheep shearer, then you've got one of the collection points that we use to gather the wool in, then we're grading and sorting it, then the wool has to be tested, and it's to go to a scouring plant, then it's to go to a spinner, then it's to go to a dye house, and it's to go to a weaver or a carpet manufacturer before it can go to a distributor and it's a really long supply chain. And now, if that supply chain is to work and everybody through that supply chain is to get some value, there's got to be collaboration and there's got to be cooperation. And I think that's my key learning. Your customer, is your friend.
Yeah.
Your supplier, you've got to have strong relationships with. And yes, as I say, there'll be points of tension, but it's how you approach those and deal with those is absolutely crucial.
100%. And I think if great relationships come with a match of values, we both think same things are important. And I guess if we can maintain that that's what we're heading for, we're all trying to do the same thing, clearly in slightly different ways, and we can have those tensions, as you say, they happen. But if we all want the same thing or want a similar outcome, then we should get there in the end.
Now, if you just take that first stage processing as the key example, if you went back 20 years ago, there'd have been half a dozen more scouring plants in Yorkshire. We're down to 2, and those are really the only 2 that can process the UK clip. And there is a plant in the Czech Republic, but they generally process wools that are much finer than ours, so Australian wool. They'll buy very small amounts of British wool. But basically, we're reliant on 2 processing companies, but we need them to process the wool, but they need us as a supplier. Yes. And our members are in a much better place from having a UK wool processing industry than the last thing any of us want is for the wool industry as a whole in the UK to be under pressure. So we've got to have sustainable demand and sustainable prices that work through a supply chain. I say, over the last 2 or 3 years, prices for farmers have been very poor. And one of the consequences of that is some farmers just can't even be bothered putting their wool on a trailer and dropping it off at a collection point with where prices are. And you've got to have that understanding through the supply chain. You don't pay enough for the wool. There won't be enough wool for you to run your factories, for you to produce your product, for you to make those mattresses. Yes, the farmers need to shear the sheep, but they don't then need to spend a morning carting it off somewhere if they're not going to get any value in return for their efforts. So it's being honest in some of these discussions and building those relationships.
Yeah, no, I can see sort of persuasion, influence, and grown-up conversations are going to be must be a daily occurrence for you.
Absolutely, and I've described some of the stakeholders we have to interact with as an organisation, and from a personal perspective, that's one of the things that I'm really enjoying about my time at British Wool. The organisation, it's small enough that you can know everybody. You can understand what people do. Now, I go into the grading depots around the UK, and I know the team's names. I know a lot of our suppliers, but it's got the complexity and the nuances that also makes it, from a personal perspective, a really stimulating place to work, and you feel you can make a difference to the future of the organization. There's changes and ways we've had to adapt over the last couple of years. We auction the wool. Prior to COVID, the auction was held in person. We had to adapt very quickly and move to an online auction system during COVID. But our IT team managed that change, and we implemented that quickly. One of the changes that's coming through supply chains is some customers now want to be able to trace which farm their wool came from. And I think 5 years ago the answer at British Wool would have been, oh, we can't do that. 12 months ago we implemented a system that every bale of wool that comes through our Bradford depot, we know of the wool in that bale, it came from these 10 farms or these 12 farms. On average, when we sell a commercial lot of wool, and we sell it in 8.5 ton batches, there's 110 different farmers who've contributed wool to each batch. But we've got an IT system in place that, from an operational perspective, it delivered us cost savings. The payback's a couple of years payback just in terms of lower admin costs and efficiency savings within the depot. But it also now means that the end brands that want fully traceable wool want to be able to put that farmer story on the end product. We can deliver that for them, and we can charge them an additional price for that information. So some of the brands that we're working with, and it's mainly been in the bedding and the mattress sector where we've seen the adoption of this, they have been paying us a premium over the last year for fully traceable wool, and that's generating more value for our members.
Brilliant.
Which, at the end of the day, we're here to return value to the sheep farmers of the UK.
Absolutely, really incredible. I honestly didn't realise when we were starting this conversation the complexity that you manage. One of the questions I always ask people is, you probably we're a business coaching organisation, and I'm keen to know who the best coaches you've ever worked with, whether that's business, sport, or life in general.
So it's been different stages of my career. So in my early days in the city, I was very fortunate. One of the firms I worked for no longer exists, but I'm sure that everyone will be familiar with the name. It was a business called Lehman Brothers. Right. And I left a year before it went wrong. It wasn't my fault that Lehman Brothers went wrong. But I was there for 7 years. And during my time there, I was on the #1 ranked team for providing advice about telecoms companies in the city. And as a learning experience, and I think this is one of the things that's been lost with a lot of the move to working from home, it's being able to eavesdrop on the conversations of the people that are more experienced than you.
Yes.
And it's often those informal conversations or overhearing what someone else is saying. If you have an attitude for learning, that can be a real opportunity. And they say, I fear that's something that has been lost to an extent over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And
particularly for people at early stages of their career, if you lose access to that working environment, that can be challenging. In my personal life, my sport is rowing. I still just about manage to do it once a week. I row for City of Sheffield in an old man's crew.
Wonderful.
But again, the coaching and the teamwork and the ethos that I've had from that sport, has been hugely rewarding. And having an outlet, having that headspace where you can, it almost forces you not to think about work.
Yes,
I think that is also really important to have the perspective and have the space.
I completely agree. My sports, well, rugby historically, but skiing, it gives me the same thing. That focus on the one thing I'm doing allows me to clear my mind. I think it's almost a form of meditation. So, are there any? Have you picked up any favourite quotes or sayings that you fall back on a regular basis, Andrew, or use in either difficult or interesting times?
I try not to I think what I do try and do, it's listening to people and making sure that when a team member comes in, you give them the opportunity to talk. So I'm very much, as a CEO, an open door CEO. But I think one of the learnings I had was, when someone comes into my office, I'm sat behind 2 or 3 computer monitor screens. I always try and make sure I get up and I move and I sit down with them at the meeting table.
Right.
And then they know they've got my full attention. And that's important for engagement. And it's trying not to dictate an answer or dictate a solution. It's giving the opportunity to team members to talk through the situation and come up with the solution themselves. As if they come up with a solution and they buy into it, yes, they're much more likely to deliver than if it's dictated from on high. And I think in terms of a lot of my approach, that's very much core to the way I try to build relationships with the team.
Brilliant. And for me, that's very, very much a coaching approach. A coaching approach is helping people find their way forward rather than telling them what they should do, because very few people really like to be told what to do on a regular basis. So
absolutely. And that has been a learning experience for me. All my career in the city, and it's the same for many people in professional roles. You never actually manage anybody. I was part of a team of very well motivated individuals, self-started, a team that didn't need managing. And then when you come into a more normal business environment, and you're given management responsibilities, I think many professionals, or often professionals, don't actually have those skills. And that is something I've had to learn and work on over the last 2 or 3 years. I wouldn't say I'm perfect every time, and I'm sure my team would say I'm not perfect every time, but hopefully I'm moving in the right direction.
Brilliant. And what else would you say you've learned about yourself during your career and your journey?
So it's the times when you're thrown in at the deep end, and it's a bit of sink and swim. So I say when I became CEO of British Wool, it was literally at 2 or 3 days' notice. So I was called by the board and said, as of next week, you're in charge, Andrew. And I went, and there's been a number of instances through my career where I've had that. But you have to grasp those opportunities. You might not think you're ready, but often you are. And if you can, take advantage of those opportunities when they come, that's when you can grow. That's when you can develop. So don't be afraid of failure, I think will be the message I'd want to leave people with. Be prepared to, people wouldn't ask you to do something if they didn't believe that you could do it. And often other people have more belief in you than you have yourselves. But don't be afraid to go out of your comfort zone. And providing that you've got the support of those around you, people want you to succeed in life. Very few people want to set you up on a pedestal to see you fail. They want to give you an opportunity. They want to see you succeed, and they'll be supporting you to do that. And so, as and when an opportunity comes through, and I can think of probably half a dozen instances through my career where I wasn't sure I was ready, but with hindsight, I was. And other people saw that I was ready. I was given that push, and I'm so very grateful that I was given that push and I took the opportunities that were presented.
Brilliant. Wonderful. That's really interesting. Yeah. And I guess looking forward now, what does the future look like for you guys, and what are the main challenges you face, if any?
So the biggest challenge that we have is that the wool prices are still too low. The main enemy, I'll be honest, it's plastics, it's synthetic materials. 70 years ago, in real terms, wool was a lot more valuable than it is today, but there were no man-made fibers to speak of at the time. Nylon was only invented in the Second World War. But the opportunity is the awareness of the environmental impacts of man-made fibers is growing hugely.
Yes.
Wool it's a natural product. It's renewable. It captures carbon as it grows. At end of life, it's biodegradable. Now, when my wool jumper gets a hole in, it can go on the compost heap. When your plastic fleece gets to the end of its life, it's going to be stuck in landfill for thousands of years. And that awareness, I think, is really positive. And as that change in behavior comes through, we are seeing brands saying, where does this come from? Caring about the materials they use in a way that even 5 years ago they weren't doing. I think the food sector is probably a bit ahead of the textile sector in this regard. But we've now got 100 different end brands that are specifying it must be British wool in the product.
Yeah, great.
That's good news. Now, wool can also be part of the solution. There's quite a lot of innovation going on looking at using wool in new ways. So examples would be the burgeoning seaweed industry. Now, they don't want to be growing seaweed off plastic ropes because you don't want to be putting any more plastic in the ocean. Now, one of the businesses we're working with is looking at using some of the less favoured types of British wool to make wool ropes that can then be used in the seaweed industry. In the forestry industry, you've seen all the tree planting projects that put the trees in plastic tubes.
Yes.
Once the tree gets established, the plastic cracks, it's there, it's polluting the environment for years to come.
Yeah.
In Germany, they've outlawed plastic tree guards. Only tree guards have to be biodegradable. There are companies in the UK working to make biodegradable tree guards out of wool.
Brilliant.
Wool in a natural resin. And there are new opportunities, and wool can be part of the solution to these environmental concerns. And projects like that, plus growing awareness of where products come from, the move to buy well, buy once, not having the throwaway fast fashion. If you buy a quality Harris tweed jacket, and Harris tweed is one of the biggest users of British wool, providing you keep your waistline in check, the jacket will last you a good 20 years. You'll wear out before the jacket does. That's buying something, a quality product made from a quality fiber, but it's so different from the throwaway society that we've had. But I sense that the change is swinging back in our direction, and that can only be a positive for British wool and our members.
Yeah, great. No, I would agree. There's definitely that feeling of as you say, renewability, environment friendly. What you just described about tree guards. My favourite walk just out of here, I come through some sort of forestry. It's probably about 10 years old, and it's just strewn with those horrible things. And it's clearly not good for the environment. It's not good visually, and it's just a waste. And
it looks a mess. And now, a responsible forestry contractor, and a lot of the contracts that are going in place now, insist that in 5 years' time, when the tree is established at the plastic, you go in and tidy it. But in terms of knowing what it will cost you to clear it up, how much is it going to cost in terms of labour to send someone into a woodland through bracken and brambles to pick up all the small bits of plastic? What is going to be the disposal cost on environmentally degraded plastic, which has been in sunlight for 5 years? You don't know what it's going to cost you in 5 years to tidy up. If you can have a biodegradable wool solution, then yes, you might pay 50 pence more a unit for it, because you're eliminating that unknown, unspecified cost down the line. And that's where it's the difference between price and value at the end of the day. Fast fashion is cheap, but what's its real cost from a social and an environmental perspective? I think wool as a natural fiber, renewable, environmentally friendly, the costs and the value from it, I don't feel that they're fully appreciated, but I think the appreciation is growing, and that can only be beneficial for our members as it comes through.
I definitely hope. I believe so, and I hope so too. And Andrew, what would you say to anybody that was thinking of going into business right now?
You need confidence, but have a plan, understand your market. Now, what are you trying to sell? Who are you trying to sell it to? Now, who's your customer at the end of the day?
Yeah.
There's no point thinking up a fantastic product if no one's going to buy it. So understand your market, understand your customer, understand your costs. Now, where are you in a supply chain? Now, it's as we've seen in the motor industry over the last couple of years, the reason fewer cars are being made is we can't get the silicon chips to go in them.
Yes.
There are 4,000 microchips in some new cars. A Land Rover from 25 years ago didn't have any in them, and that is where you've had a bottleneck in a supply chain, and you really need to understand your business, understand your suppliers, understand your customers. What are the risk factors? What are the economics? But if you've got a good idea, back yourself and go for it, and then build the relationships with the right partners. And I wish anyone going down that path every success.
Brilliant. Very, very, very sound advice. And finally, Andrew, what would be the best advice you could give an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do so?
Work hard, take the opportunities. I think and fundamentally find a job that you enjoy and you can be passionate about. I think it's most disappointing when you see people that say they don't enjoy their job. If you don't enjoy your job, you're probably in the wrong job. Not everyone can be a CEO, but you can find an organization to work for that you can care about and you can be passionate about and you believe in. And I think if you care about the organization you work for, you get an awful lot more fulfillment from the work that you're doing.
Very, very sound advice. And I have to say, Andrew, thank you. Firstly, thank you so much. But you can see the passion and in you and what you do. Given you almost came into the role, I wouldn't say by accident, but it was a little bit coincidental. But I can see the passion and the love you've got for what you do. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And if anybody wanted to contact you or British Wool, what would be the best way to do so?
Absolutely. So in terms of our website, it's britishwool.org.uk. You can get in touch with there. All our contact details are on there. If there are any businesses that are wanting to explore using British Wool, we're here to help. We can provide the right contacts in the supply chain, whether you're looking to produce a jumper, a carpet, a new bedding range. If you want to use British Wool, use us as a resource. We'll provide the raw material, but we'll give you the right contacts throughout the supply chain to deliver that as well. But britishwool.org.uk.
Brilliant. Well, once again, thank you so much, Andrew. And
thank you, Chris.
It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.